All right, in these segments, we're going to be welding a 5-inch pipe in 3 different positions with a 60-10 root and a 70-18 filling cap. Pretty much what you've learned about the 60-10 already is going to ring true the same on the pipe, except we're just going in a circle, okay? A few things we do have to talk about, which y'all have already gone over, but it's very important, is our prep and our landing, all right? Without a landing, the 60-10 is a quick freezing rod that has very deep penetration, runs very hot, so the amperage ranges are a little bit lower. Without that landing, the landing controls the heat. Without that landing, that 60-10 is going to blow through there. We have no control of our root penetration, which is what we're after. We're welding inside the pipe from the outside. So we got to read the weld from the outside. A good 1/8 landing, and also, y'all understand how the bevels are always a little different. If we have a real steep bevel, you can go bigger than 1/8, all right? Go a little bit bigger than 1/8, because this metal here is still not real heavy. If we have a shallow bevel where there's plenty of meat, then you don't want to go any more than 1/8. If you do that, then you run the risk of actually penetrating the weld. So you can judge by your bevels, because the bevels aren't always going to be the same, all right? The bevel ranges in this code, we're welding under the ASME, boiler and pressure pipe code. The actual code reads 37.5 degrees plus 7.5 minus 0. So these, depending on the pipe wall size, this bevel could be as little as 30 degrees and be acceptable on Schedule 40 pipe. We also know that the pipes aren't always even, okay? I like to take, in this testing position, you make a couple welds. You make one to get the job, you make one to keep the job. So I'm taking a little bit more time if I'm taking a weld test. So I've already rolled this pipe around, but I want to show y'all. And I've got a spot where the plasma dug into it. If we dug that all the way out with a grinder, we'd end up with a really deep gas there. So what I choose to do is spin the pipe around, find where you see less daylight, and just put a mark on it, okay? Then you know you can line it up there. We're gonna put our 1/8 gap in here, all right? I always put my tack, if I have a bad spot in my bevel, I'm putting my tack right there. I'm in full control of it, it's right in front of me, and I can control that. Unlike the tacks on the plate, which were like bridge tacks, when we're making a pipe weld, on most pipe tests, they want to see your tie-ins. In the real world, you might weld to a fitter's tack, grind it out, and weld through it. If we have to make a repair on your root, get with your instructor, okay? There's no sense in covering a root up if you got one bad spot in it when it can be repaired before you cap it, fill and cap it. So I'm gonna go right here with my first tack. Obviously, when we arc up on this, we can't shove the rod right through. We gotta heat it up a little bit. We want our tack to be 1/2 to 3/4 at the max, full penetration. You want the width of your tack to be the same width of the root you're gonna run, so when you make a tie-in, it doesn't come and close up, and you see where you tie it in every time. So once I get it hot enough, I'm gonna go ahead and ease it in. I'm gonna act like I'm actually gonna weld the root. And then I'm gonna break off after about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. Too big of a tack with this 60-10, and you won't be able to move the pipe afterwards, okay? You won't be able to fit it up. So I've lined the inside up best as possible. That's the best way to do it. Rule of thumb on amperages, this rod is, to me, a 72 to 82 on this pipe, okay? Once you've done enough prep on your pipes, you'll have your amperage ranges down to where, you know, you're pretty close every time. I put my first tag at 76. Now I know I can control the heat on this rod 4 or 5 amps easily by the way I'm pointing it. If I point it back to the keyhole, it's gonna keep it hotter, I'll take shorter steps. If I point away, it's gonna keep it cool and I can maybe close it up better. So I'll make my decision after my first tack if I need to go up or down with my amperage, okay? Don't ever second guess that. If a weld gets away from you, the best thing to do is stop before it's too late, okay? So I'm gonna arc up here on this bevel where this bad spot was. Actually, I need to turn it around a little bit, make sure I get both bad spots. And like I said, with this little dish in the bevel, this way it's not in the realm of the weld we're gonna make. We can make it here while we're comfortable and we can control it better. So get the rod in there. Now I'm gonna establish my keyhole. And I can already tell by the way this is running, it's running just a little bit hot. That seemed a little bit warm, but it could have been where that bevel was shallower there. like we talked about with the bevels earlier. So what I like to do is let it sit for just a couple seconds. So when I pull my wire out, this side won't shrink anymore, okay? We're never gonna have a true 1/8 gap. I don't care what you say, because that 6010 draws so much. So once my wire slide, once it cools, you can slide your wire out. There's no fighting it, trying to pull it out. And I usually look at my pipe, it stayed pretty even, it stayed pretty square. I like the gap all the way around. Gap trade stayed pretty true. I'm gonna put my rod in on this side a little bit, it's kind of loose. This tack went this way. Whichever way we're welding with a 6010, the way you're heading is the way it's shrinking, okay? So the pipe twisted a little bit this way, or this way, because I went that way with this tack. I'm gonna go the opposite way with my tack on this side to try to counteract that. I do have a hammer and a wedge with me to fit it up if I need to, but the less banging, the better off we are. So make sure that we go 90 degrees from each one of them. You can look through the pipe and see it. You can also just take a soapstone and make a mark. So we hit the quarter points. We want to weld these a quarter at a time. A 5-inch pipe can be welded at a quarter at a time. One rod, if I put one 6010 rod in 1/4 of a 5-inch pipe, I know I've got the proper amount of reinforcement that I like in it, okay? That's personal. If you get a whole quarter of this pipe done and you got that much rod left, there's no metal in that pipe. So they keep that in mind too. I like to take short steps. I don't like to get out of the keyhole very far. There are situations when you might have to get it cooled down some before you get back in it. So I'm gonna look through my pipe. I made a mark there, but I'm gonna look through and just visually get an eyeball on their attack, and I'm gonna go the opposite way and see if it'll make this wire tighten up. Yeah, this sounds a lot better now. I don't know if you can hear the difference to the other side with that thinner metal from the plasma cut. It was blowing through a little bit better, so I like the way that feels. See that? That wire went in loose before. Now it, just by tacking, I don't have to beat on it now. It brought that wire now where it's tight. So we'll just pull it out now. Take a look at everything, make sure we got good penetration on our tacks. And we do, and then we're gonna go 90 degrees from these two. If you want to put a mark on it, like I said, you're spin it around, put my other 4 tack in it, and we'll be ready to weld this thing. Another way I gauge my stuff, and it's 5 rods for a 5-inch pipe for the 6010. That's how I look at it. Doesn't always work out that way. 1 rod is sufficient for all my tacks. If I burn it down to that, I know I got good tacks in it. And then 1 rod per quarter. That's how I keep myself in check. We want to make sure that your tacks are all penetrated. I don't know if you guys can get on that a little bit. And we want the penetration. Obviously, it's not penetrated where we started at. That's where we're going to feather it. But we want the size of the tack to be the same size as the weld we're going to put in. We're on our second position of the 3 positions for this process, the 6010 root, 7018 fill and cap. This is a 5G. That means the pipe is actually in a horizontal position. The weld is going vertically. Like I mentioned before, on the pressure code that we're welding on, ASME, the weld is made, progression is from the bottom to the top, bottom to the top. Doesn't mean you can't weld from 3 to 12 first, or either way, and I always quarter this weld as well. Always put your tighter side on the top of this weld, okay, because that's where gravity wants it to fall through at. The bottom, we just got to keep it buried. Top, you're going to make sure that you point towards that tack a little bit to keep the heat out of that keyhole. Position it, don't make it so high that when you get to the top, your helmet's going to hit you in your thing. So give yourself just enough room to see the top visually for the root and for the fill and cap. and that you got room on the bottom. I put a piece of dummy pipe here, just for my arm on this side. On this side, I can use the prop here. So like I said, I got a really tight side on the top. That always goes on the top. I'm gonna weld this tight side first, then I'm gonna jump to the other side and weld it. Coming off the tacks on the side of the pipe, we wanna make sure we come off with a small push angle. If we come out of that tack with a 60-10 because it's so hot, and we come off that tack pointing down to the tack, 2 or 3 steps into it, it's gonna get too big. So make sure that when we come in and bust in there, we're straight in, and then immediately go to just a very small push. And just follow the puddle, follow the puddle. I have a tight gap here, so I'll be able to maintain. I'll probably have to do some dragging on this, I'm not sure yet. But if you come out of that tack, like I said, pointing down on the side, it's gonna get big every time. By welding this tighter side first, number one, heat rises, so the pipe's nice and cool right now, but I also will ensure that it won't close up anymore. Worst case scenario, we could take a cutoff wheel and open a gap up before you even weld it, if it's that tight. I'll automatically go to my opposite quarter now. I ran that fairly warm because it was tight. I'm gonna bump it down a little bit for that bottom. On the bottom, we can point back and use the drag angle. Gravity's going against us there. We gotta keep the metal in the pipe, so a little bit of pressure on that keyhole each time. It's like pushing your hand up. While it freezes, it'll freeze up inside that pipe like we want it. So on the bottom, I usually pause in my keyhole a little bit. On the top, I pause out of the keyhole and then drop it in. Like I mentioned earlier, I'll put this little piece of that dummy pipe on here for my elbow when we get out here. On this side, you can always use the pole here. You could put a pair of vice grips here if you wanted to. Like we talked about with the 2G, in the real world, this pipe's gonna be going who knows how far, so you're always gonna have that to put that on. Some people steady the rod on the bottom with their finger a little bit. Sometimes I do too. I just let my finger slide down as I go. It depends on how comfortable I am and how I feel that day, actually. Pack that tie in nice and tight. A little bit bigger gap here, so you really got to keep this rod engaged. We'll jump up and do this top quarter over here, then I'll go back to the bottom. Had a couple rods burn off funny. One thing about a 60-10, if it gets dried out, it will burn funny. So if you can't control it, that arc comes out sideways one way or the other, then get yourself another rod. It's hard to control that arc, especially on an open route, when the flux has been dried a little bit. And you'll know exactly when, you'll be able to tell. Same thing, I'm gonna come out pointing straight in. I'm not gonna point back down at that tack. last quarter now. Sew this bad boy up, and we'll be ready to start our filling cap. As I said before, a little bit of a drag angle on the bottom and pausing in the keyhole. Try to keep a little pressure on that metal so it freezes up in the pipe. That completes our route. If you notice, everything I welded was uphill, even though I didn't start at the very bottom. I actually started on this side, went from 3 to 12 for the tighter gap. Had a few issues with rods. I don't know if it was me or the rods. The rods seemed to burn a little funny. I just stopped what I was doing, got a new rod, made a good restart. Now I'm gonna clean it up a little bit like I did the 2G, and I'm gonna start my, I'm gonna run my hot pass, which will also go 6 to 12 or bottom to top. This is gonna be more of a weave, not a stringer BDK. So I'm gonna be doing a small weave for the fill pass, and this is a small groove, which I like that for the 5G, so we don't have a big wide cap to worry with. So I should be able to get one fill, and then the cap should come right after that, but we'll see. I'm gonna grind it up real quick and get ready to roll. All right, 7018, same amperage range with a 332 like we had before. I like to run mine on the 5G. I run it just a little bit lower than I do on the other positions because the pipe gets very hot. I usually run mine around 84. We gotta make sure we can see. The 7018 on the bottom, I'm gonna use a small trailing angle. I'm gonna have a tighter arc length so I can see up. Your long arc down there, you're not gonna be able to see a tighter arc length. And the people take off the bottom too quick. You gotta tighten that arc length up, point back to the puddle just a hair so you can see the metal leaving the rod, and then you'll be able to see what you're doing down there. And there is a little bit of area, probably 1.5 inches, that's true overhead. So we can go a little bit further. I always go a little bit further on one side, so I have to reach so far under from the other side to make my tie-in. So I'll start this side a little bit further over than normal. As long as I'm not coming downhill, we're good.
weaving a 70-18, the key is to stay on the bevel on each side and pause for a second to keep that puddle from crowning in the middle. As you move across the middle, we don't go slow in the middle, the puddle thins out by the time it gets to the other side.
Because the metal is following that rod. So we have to pause there to make it fill up to the amount of metal that's already in there. Same on the restarts. I'm gonna start ahead of the 70-18, not behind it. One thing I didn't mention about this particular pipe is that the inside diameter wasn't quite the same, but it was within code. They call it the high-low, and the code actually allows 1/16, which is quite a bit. It was well under that, so I split the difference. And where you'll really see it at is when you start capping it, one bevel edge will be a little bit higher than the other one. But once we put the final cap on, you'd never know it. As I get to the top of my 5G, I'll put my rod in at an extreme angle so that when I get to the top, I can roll my wrist over and have a trading angle to keep that 70-18 from flattening out on the top on me.
I always like to grind my restart on the bottom.
Gives me a little shiny spot. When I get back to it, I can see it'll light up good to make my tying on the bottom.
So I'm gonna grind a little divot in that side of the fill.
Same thing, I'm gonna start with a trading angle. I'm gonna work my way to a small push angle and then to a drag angle at the very top. Start about an inch ahead, come down to my crater, go from one side to the other, and then take off again. Looks like on this small bevel, we'll be able to probably cap it after this hot pass last fill, if you will. Some spots might be a little low. We'll take a good look at it when we get done. Always make sure you come over the bead you're tying into about 1/4 of an inch, then come back a hair to make sure we don't have a shallow spot there. You get to the weld and stop, and there's gonna be a crater there every time. You just get to the edge of that weld and stop. We gotta go up on that weld and then pause briefly. Find my little bottom spot so I see where it's tying at. Nice and easy. We got to cap this groove weld. On a groove weld, you never want the rod to leave the bevel. You actually crawl out, stop right at the bevel edge, and let the puddle crawl over the edge so we don't undercut that edge. Now we'll be ready for the cap. I'll make sure it's cleaned up good.
Hitting highs and lows with the grinder. Make sure that my edge is nice and clean so I know where I have somewhere clear to look at and stop. You can see the fill is all the way up to the edge. And a couple hiccups on the bottom from positioning. Hand got a little hot, just had to make some adjustments on the fly. Best thing to do if you get in a situation, stop, okay? Just stop what you're doing and look at everything again, set up again. So I'm gonna hit that a little bit with the grinder and I'm gonna run the cap on this side of the pipe real quick. So the little edge is cleaned out, there's no slag in there. Your file is usually clean good enough for that. So what I'm gonna focus on now is making sure the pipe's good and full now, making sure that my rod does not go out to the edge of the bevel. I'm gonna travel across. As we move across, not too quick, but we can't go slow across the middle. The puddle thins out. When we stop, the puddle catches up with the rod. So we stop right before the edge of the bevel, let the metal crawl over the edge. If we go too far, we're gonna undercut it. So it's just gonna be a cross and pause, a cross and pause, a cross and pause. You notice I just used a file because there's no bigger pipe here. This is getting pretty hot, and I made that mistake a minute ago, and I ended up flubbing up a little bit, but that's okay. Everything's not perfect. If anybody tells you there's a perfect weld, I'm gonna tell you they're wrong. Every weld has discontinuities in it. As long as they don't become defects, then we're good. So small push angle up the side so we get to the top, not much.
go through that small trailing angle on the top, so I'm gonna bend my rod back a little bit and come off to the side. And that would complete that weld. And we'll be back in a minute with the 60.